The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is renowned biologist Edward O. Wilson, two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize and author of numerous books on the environment, most recently, Half-Earth and A Window on Eternity. Please join me for the first half of this conversation here at the Monroe County Museum as I speak with Dr. Edward O. Wilson during the annual Alabama Writers Symposium. Well, Ed, it's nice to see you again.
I'm awfully pleased and honored to be with you again, Don.
We have talked twice in the past. The first time, like this meeting, we were in Monroeville, and you were talking about, at that point, you were just shifting to group selection. You had, as a, of course, Darwinian natural selectionist, but you were refining that. You were working on two projects at that time. Two ideas were important to you. One was group selection, and the other was altruism, especially with Medal of Honor winners. And you've proceeded on both those topics. That was 15 years ago or something, but you proceeded along both those lines. How are we on altruism these days? What's your latest thinking about? Is that part of group selection?
Yes. Group selection is the key to the origin of human social behavior. It carries with it, unlike the theory that I toppled, which was a prevailing theory at the time called kin selection. It toppled that idea that social behavior in humans comes from the recognition of kin, of genetic kin, and the pouring of altruistic behavior upon their benefit. I overthrew that with a couple of mathematicians. Now I was coming back to something, in fact, that had been Darwin's view, that the competition between groups of people, tribes of people, has the result of accelerating social behavior, and that includes in it altruism. And altruism, not just to kin, although that would probably be the most intense and immediate, but to others that were not related. If they were seen as a tribe, but even more, it had the potential of edging over into different tribes, the altruism toward different tribes, and then also to nature and wild creatures. And that I extended in another book called Biophilia that had a good effect as an underpinning of the conservation ethic, that human beings really do want to save other life and other species, that they have a strong feeling. The group selection was very controversial. Of course, when you replace one theory with another one, you ruffle some feathers or whatever.
People have whole careers founded
yes.
on
well, now
the
you're
old
right about
theory.
that. Yes, there were a lot of my fellow biologists who had built their careers on building the theory, which my mathematician friends and I had overthrown, of kin selection. And but that didn't bother me, because it turned out that group selection explains so much more. It explains not just the general existence of a genetic trend toward altruism, but its pervasive presence, in dealing with other forms of life, other humans and other forms of life as well, which we know exist. This explains it. Kin selection did not.
Yeah, and I love the connection that you made with the Medal of Honor winners.
Yes.
Those young men, usually, I don't know if there are military women who have won or not. Are there? I don't know that.
I think not a woman yet.
But the whole idea that a person would give up his life for another person who is not genetically connected.
Not at all. The highest altruism in the world may well be that among a band of brothers struggling to survive. And at any rate, an interesting story is connected with this, and I'll try to be brief. And that is that in writing all of this, I stirred the interest of a Medal of Honor winner, a man named Bill Stockdale. And he had won his Medal of Honor as the ranking naval pilot in the Hanoi prison during the Vietnam War, and with his bravery in organizing the men, standing up to torture and so on. And he wrote me that he was now at the Hoover Institution studying altruism and leadership. And so one day I got on an elevator. We both were getting a book award. There was this gentleman standing there with, we were in formal dress, and he had the Medal of Honor around his neck, and I was thrilled. And I said to this fellow on the elevator, I said, I have never met a Medal of Honor winner personally myself. And he said, I'm Bill, Stockdale, and and he said, I wanted to meet you. Come to my room, and we went to his hotel room before we went on to the meeting, and he presented me with a picture he had made of himself, his retirement picture in full uniform as a vice admiral. And on the desk of his formal picture, he has a copy of a book on human nature, my Pulitzer first book. And we were close friends then, and we carried on a correspondence over many years. I felt honored. I felt a radiance, coming from knowing a Medal of Honor winner. I made a study in the course of writing the book and other books of Medal of Honor winners.
Right. Yeah. All your concerns are woven. God, I think I'm going to make an ecology metaphor. I hope not. I'll be stopped short of that anyway. But your interests are interwoven. And of course, but the primary thrust of all of it is we're destroying the earth, and we must stop. we must desist in destroying the planet that we have to live on. An attempt, in my reading of your last several books, is that you're going at this same idea, the same project, from a variety of different angles. Yeah. The Gorongosa Park is one angle, but a while back you had the creation. And we discussed this just a little bit several years ago. That is, if you could convince Christians who believe in creationism to preserve the planet, we'd be farther along that road. So you have the letter to the Baptist pastor.
Yes.
How'd that work out for you?
Very well, but not nearly enough to make me happy. The book opens with a letter to an imaginary pastor, in which I say to him, we have fundamentally different beliefs. I stated what his is, and as a former, raised as a Southern Baptist, I could speak with some authority. Mm-hmm. I stated what his was. And I spoke with great respect in stating what I believed it to be. And then I stated my very opposing view, which is essentially, well, I'm not quite an atheist, because I don't think a real scientist can say there is absolutely no God. How would any person know that? So I would just say I have no particular immediate belief. I'm not an agnostic, because an agnostic is a person who believes, well, we'll never know, not on this earth. And I just presented, though, myself as a person who was not a believer. And so I then said, that recognized, I think we could be friends. Let's talk about a subject that's of enormous importance to both of us, and that's how to save the creation. You believe that the creation is there in one way. I believe it's there in another way, for another reason. Shall we quibble? Let us join forces, and you have a lot of power in saving the creation. And I took the book on from there. I had tremendously positive response from the Protestant evangelicals. I was invited to a number of places for talks, and I met leaders. I was invited to speak with the leaders of the Mormon Church within their president's office, and I had a great time of it. And I think it had an impact because there was evidence of a stronger develop within particularly among the evangelicals, but to get more involved in conserving the rest of life, saving the rest of life. But on the other hand, it's sort of tapered off because the evangelical conservatives are very much concerned with the immediate coming, second coming, and
exactly. How were you able to convince people who thought the world was going to end in 40 years that they should save the last of the elephants? I mean, how would that persuade anybody?
Well, that's as I knew and I saw illustrated within the evangelical community, which is enormous in the United States. There are very differing views on this, mm-hmm. and I don't want to enter in trying to say what they believe or make judgment on it, but some believe what you just said, that we are here on this earth only to save souls, and the rest is trivial. This is just a way station, to a better life. But many other evangelicals think differently. I mean, and to the extent that they feel they have a duty to save the rest of life. And that was a group that was, I think, encouraged by that book. And but of course, they had reached these conclusions on other grounds on their own.
Well, I thought you I thought your position turned some when you got to the meaning of life. I just read that, I don't know, 6 months ago or whatever it was. And I thought, Wilson has taken the gloves off. That is actually what I thought. I said the gentle approach from the creation is over. And in the meaning of life, you went to tribalism. And the terrible pain that's caused on the planet by warring faiths. And was I more or less right
yes,
about
that's
that
correct.
shift?
What I did was to, I didn't change my view any much from the original introduction to the imaginary pastor. But what I did was to explore, now as an evolutionary biologist, why we have such passions. First, as you just mentioned earlier, how we can be so kindly and giving of ourselves under special circumstances, or under many different kinds of special circumstances. But in addition, now I wanted to look into the same well springs of human passion, looking at it as an evolutionary biologist, how it's so pervasive and almost overwhelming in human affairs. And it wasn't so much that I said, emphasized religion versus religion, as tribe against tribe. Mm-hmm. And this may sound a little absurd to people at first, but Alabama versus Auburn has the same passions, shall we say, as Christian versus Muslim. That is, it has always been to the enormous benefit in survival and reproduction and safety to be strongly tribal. That is, to join others of similar heritage, of similar interest, into a tight, cohesive group, that you will do better as an individual and acquire traits of that we call admirable, heroic, far-seeing, altruistic, by engaging in competition that's openly tribal. And that different religions, show this quality consistently. I made a distinction, though, in the meaning of human existence, between religion that one could call theological, in other words, something on which we could all sit around and agree and be happy and talk very meaningful about, and that would be the great issues of, say, what is the meaning of life, or what is there a God, is there an afterlife? We could differ and talk about that with going to fisticuffs. But if you deal with the creation stories, of different religions, which is the identifying core
Right.
of a particular religious group. And you challenge that, particularly with a different one.
Mine is right.
Yeah.
Yours is wrong.
Oh, that's right. And this is not trivial. This is for keeps, that I'm right and you're wrong.
There's a quotation from, it's in The Meaning of Life. It says, religion has killed spirituality.
That's a very, yes.
It's your quotation.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
right. Exactly. I think that...
Do you want to expand on that? Because
Yeah,
a
I
lot of
think-
people don't really make it. I don't think a lot of people bring to mind the distinction between the two. Religion has killed spirituality.
I was summarizing in that statement the point earlier made, that in fact, if we talked about religion, about the great issues of afterlife, or of the existence of God, or of divine intervention, and so on, we're going to disagree, but in thinking about them, we're engaging in really spiritual thinking, and some of the deepest thinking humans are capable of. But on the other hand, if we are placing the creation stories side by side, then we are playing with fire.
Fire is exactly where I want to go. I have always loved a dissertation upon roast pig, the Charles Lamb essay about how people invented cooking meat. And in A Window on Eternity, you have your own much more plausible theory. The lamb is what they burned the house down and they burned the barn down with the pig in it, and then they discovered they really liked that.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
But then from then on, every time they wanted to cook a pig, they had to burn the barn down. But you're in A Window on Eternity, you have that lightning strikes out on the savannah.
Yeah.
What is it that happens?
Yes. Let me, just in very abbreviated form, and I don't want to
Sure.
bore you or the listeners to tell you what really happened.
Yeah.
Okay, now we base this on a lot of evidence piling up in paleontology and in archaeology and studies of human physiology and so on. It was about 2 to 3 million years ago that the pre-human ancestors, the first members of the genus Homo, the Homo habilis, the habiline pre-humans, began in evolution to rapidly increase the size of the brain. Something extraordinary happened. They went from somewhere around 500 cubic centimeters brain space, zipped right up over 1 million years to 900, and then on to 14.
Zip over 1 million years, all right.
Well, in evolutionary, hey, listen, we're talking about the most complex
Yes.
biological instrument in the history of the Earth.
Yeah.
Well, but it was remarkable, and it's worth commenting upon. It was like this. And what happened? Well, this is not my theory. This is theory that's being agreed on by more and more anthropologists who study these fossils, the remains, the evidences of how they lived and so on. It happened on the African savanna. That's where I've done a lot of work recently.
Yeah.
And there on the African savanna, you could see the environment in which they lived, which included lightning-struck ground fires,
Yeah.
and that swept through the area, and in so doing, commonly trap and kill substantial numbers of animals. It does under natural conditions today. Many of those animals were then available essentially as cooked meat lying there with scavengers coming in.
So old Homo habilis is walking along and goes, I smell something really good.
It wasn't that easy.
Oh, all right.
Because, you see, all the others, the relatives and the precursors of Homo habilis, were vegetarian.
Uh-huh.
And their bone structure, the teeth, the chemistry of the teeth, we have all those things to show that they ate vegetables, roots, leaves, so on. But we have evidence, too, that Homo habilis, this one strain, began to pick up a little bit on meat. It was a new source, a powerful new source of energy. But in order to digest meat, you have to go through a lot of changes, as you well know, in your digestive system, in the way you chew, and the size of your teeth. And so the evolution from Homo habilis to higher forms, and we have pretty clear, steps now worked out, involve that profound change in the body and the head shape and the bigger and bigger brain. And we know now at about this time, humans, the pre-humans, control fire. They were making campsites and controlling fires. And almost certainly they were beginning to cook their own meat. That's how it began.
I found that particularly, I love that. I love the whole idea of the animal with the broken leg who's caught by the fire and cooked and or what have you.
Well, actually, yeah, they didn't have to have a broken leg. They just had to get trapped.
Right.
Yeah.
Or don't be slow, or it's an old story. But the eating of the meat contributed to the growth in the size of the brain. Yes. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Now, in your last two books, where you're talking about overpopulation on Earth and the cutting down of rainforests and the need to plant grains in order to raise meat, now looks as if one of the answers to the problem of the 21st century is a return to at least a partial vegetarianism.
I would say we've always been partial, and I think probably the ancestors of modern humanity always were partially vegetarian as well. So what we clearly need to do is to try to feed ourselves and feed ourselves abundantly without destroying the world. It takes an awful lot of land, and it takes an awful lot of Earth's energy to raise a cow.
Yes.
And those steaks are delicious, but the Earth pays a price.
I'm not sure this is answerable, but just loosely, we don't want all global humans to go vegetarian, but we want them to eat less meat.
That's precisely the case, yeah.
How much less? By
well,
10% less, 50% less?
Well, I leave that to the dietitians and to the capability of people to raise meat, but I think there's a general agreement that the less red meat we eat, the better it is for individual health, incidentally.
Oh, sure.
And the much better it is for the environment. We are probably going to continue. It's just a natural economic trend that's inevitable. We're going to go more and more to fish farms, in which I might add the South has led with its catfish farms and so on. That's becoming universal now. Fishing, that is, raising fish, farming fish. So we'll get a lot of animal protein that way, and shrimp and other marine and aquatic creatures on very little, much reduced amount of space.
No, we won't have to cut down 1 million acres of rainforest to raise crops that will then go to feed one cow.
That's correct, yeah.
Right.
And we should stop cutting down the natural grasslands of the Middle West and high plains to raise corn in order to produce biofuel for our car engines.
I hadn't thought about biofuel at all, but you have, apparently.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea.
It's a terrible idea.
So fossil fuel, that's not the choice, though, right? You would take the third. You would take the renewable third choice.
I think the trends are powerfully in that way now. As we speak, I understand, the solar energy has grown so pervasive, and the technology to create it so advanced that it's less expensive. It's now becoming less expensive than carbon-based fuel, fossil fuel we take out of the ground. Now, if we can move that worldwide, and I think just straight economics and competition will move it worldwide, well, then I think we'll go to alternative energy much more quickly than people had projected. You
realize that you and your tribe can never run in a primary election in Iowa.
Now you've got me.
Because they grow the corn there, and everybody,
Yes,
everybody has to sign on
Yes, I should have been aware.
for biofuel, or you can't get a single vote.
Yeah, I think that's not a good thing. There are other ways for the wonderful state of Ohio to remain rich and prosperous.
Your book, last year's book, so to speak, A Window on Eternity, which is about Gorongosa Park in Mozambique. First of all, it's a beautiful book. I mean, you're not who's the photographer?
The photographer is Peter Naskreki, superlative photographer, wildlife, including small creatures like insects.
Well, that's very important.
Very.
That we take pictures of the small creatures, not just the hippos. I read that book in a sense as, in all the talk about Armageddon, whether it's a Christian fundamentalist Armageddon or whether it's the Armageddon of the biosphere, I read A Window on Eternity as a kind of a lesson that says, we want to know what Armageddon looks like. It happened here.
Yeah.
What happened in Mozambique that caused such a destruction of all their large animals and so on? What happened there?
What happened was can be answered in one word: the Portuguese. The Portuguese were terrible colonists. They ruled the Indian coast and the countryside inward in what it was today Mozambique for 400 years after Vasco da Gama and others made the first contacts. And they treated throughout and up to modern times the Mozambican people as just slaves. I mean, the people were kept deliberately out of schools, untrained, with only the most menial jobs. It was the worst colonial empire in terms of human, violation of human rights into the most recent times anywhere in the world. And when finally the Mozambicans got enough people within this nation of about 30 million people to produce, as it turned out, when the revolution occurred, there were 13 people, native people in Mozambique, who had a high school education. The rest had nothing.
Really?
And when the revolution occurred, added by Tanzania from the north, it was bloody. And when it succeeded finally, about 90% of the Portuguese returned to Portugal, and before they left, they smashed equipment. They just left Mozambique is in poor condition as almost they could inflict. That was followed by a desperate leadership turning communist, not because he was ideologically communist, but because Maoist China and the Soviet Union offered him help and could give it to him right away. So he joined them, as at this point, South Africa and Rhodesia, it was called now, Zimbabwe, were they had colonial governments, that is, in control. They found a native country, communist, of black Africans, intolerable. So they created a mercenary army to invade, but it included quite a few Mozambicans who turned with them, and conducted one of the most savage civil wars in modern history. Somehow, the people in America didn't hear much about this.
No,
but
don't know a thing about it.
That the figure agreed on is 1 million Mozambicans approximately were killed, and 3 million went into exile. And in the course of the revolution, the mercenary army made its headquarters in Mozambique's greatest national park, which was the Gorongosa on the Zimbabwe border. And they just destroyed all of the animals, almost all of them.
Did they literally eat them?
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
ate
that
them.
is
They destroyed them to eat them. Every one they could catch. It was only a small handful of elephants that managed to escape. Some of the species were driven to extinction, and it was just a ruin when about 10 years ago, 10 to 15, I can't remember the exact date, an American philanthropist named Greg Carr, who's become one of my best friends, made a tour at the request of the Mozambican government. The country was slowly recovering, bringing in schools, and gradually it's a democracy of all things. And now is tightly allied with the non-communist nation. But at any rate, Greg Carr was a wealthy man who devoted his life and his fortune to rebuilding Gorongosa.
We're bringing that back.
He did. He got animals from surrounding countries. He carefully protected those that had survived. And today it is returning to its stature as one of the great parks of Africa.
Two things. One thing that amused me was an animal that did not suffer too much in terms of extinction were the Nile crocodiles, because people were afraid of them. You could eat a crocodile, right? If you could catch it.
Well, that's the thing. I've now had the thrill of traveling among the crocodiles, as these 12-footers come off the bank, and slide into the water, watching you with their eyes close up, or seeing them from the road, lying along the border. They came through just fine because you can shoot a crocodile, but then it'll go into the water and die in the water. And if you wish to recover your 300-pound crocodile and have crocodile meat, why, you're going to have to go in there and bring it back. And you are not necessarily going to be the one who does the eating.
I love the idea that the crocodile is, if this were a cartoon, the crocodile would be saying, you think you're going to eat me? No, I'm going to eat you.
No, they would love to have people swimming among them. No, you don't just go out swimming in the lake there.
No. When you get to the next book, when you get to Half Earth, and we'll get there generally, one of the schools of pessimism, and this is the way I link these last two books of yours. In Half Earth, there's a school of pessimism that says it's too late. These are the too laters. And I don't know I don't know how consciously you meant this. Probably a lot, because that's the way these things go. But the too late thesis is disproved by the renaissance of the Gorongosa Park. I mean, is that the kind of thing that was in your head?
Yes. The restoration by a still desperately poor African country with a democracy, it was shaky, but a democracy, was willing to invest large sections of land. And I like to say we because my advisory role has kept me going, have gotten, I should say, Greg Carr, with excellent relations with the government, has managed now to get them to agree to a corridor that runs from the park, with about 1 million acres, a corridor that runs all the way north to the Zambezi River. So now it's a huge national park, and that land will be preserved, and it's for the benefit of the people. So I have used this as an example of what can be done if people wish to take the extra effort to save the rest of life.
It's not too late.
It's not, but it is the fact, and this is what I've done in the book, Half Earth, is to give the best recent scientific evidence of where we are. And it's grim. We're accelerating extinction so that we're now approaching 1,000 times the rate of species loss that existed before humanity came along. And our global conservation efforts have been noble. They've achieved a lot around the world, but they've only managed to save, on the land especially, only about 1/5 of the species that are known to be endangered. And that's sort of the equivalent of having a surgeon who's treating an accident victim who's managed to stop about a fifth of the bleeding. Congratulations, your patient will be dead by the morning.
You are bleeding from 5 arteries.
Yeah.
But I have fixed this one.
Yeah. Well, and the fact is, though, so we had to do something drastic, and I proposed half the world be set aside a refuge. And believe it or not, that went worldwide a month or two ago from a summary article I published in the New York Times, from the New York Times putting it as an international issue. And I've received nothing but encouragement and enthusiasm from around the world. People love the idea. Of course, at the beginning, you say, you can't do that, you can't move people. You don't have to move people. We have a national park system, for example, in this country, in which we've done it. Like, for example, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We don't move the people. We don't disturb private property rights. You don't need to. You need to identify half of, in big chunks and little chunks around the world, on the land and then the sea, that can be combined to cover half the world. Most of these places would have relatively few people in them, but nonetheless, the important thing is that you don't disturb them. You don't move anybody, and you don't disturb their property rights.
Something that, as I was reading along about not moving people for this particular purpose, I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but people are doing that already. I mean, I go to Greece once in a while, and there are 11 million Greeks, and half of them live in Athens.
Yes.
And that is true. It's true in the United States as well. We are
Yeah.
clustering. We are already moving into congested areas and leaving huge areas empty. No?
That is correct, and that is something that people haven't thought very much about. It's just one of several unintended consequences of people moving and the way and making their living in certain ways. And one of them is the implosion of populations around the world into megacities. Yeah. So human problems are primarily going to be how to make a livable city and how to have a stable income with cities with 30 or 40 million people in them. And that's what we're doing. That's what we want to do. But we have other consequences that are unintended that are moving us in the right direction. One is that fertility drops drastically among women. That is, they decide, if they have power to decide, and they're part of the economy, and they can do so, to reduce the number of their children. So they have a smaller number of high-quality children instead of playing the lottery and just making as many children as possible and hoping that 1 or 2 might survive and help them. Yeah. That's bringing the population to a downward curve. So demographic estimates at the present time places the peak at the end of the century at about 10 or 11. That's 50% more than now.
So if we can manage another 80 years, we will, in the natural course of things, taper off.
We will.
I know you remember this. I remember when there was a spate of books. Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, I think, got the most attention at the time, but everybody was talking about the global catastrophe that would come from overpopulation. But I remember probably 10 years ago, that had been rejected as an idea, that overpopulation was no longer a threat.
Overpopulation is still a threat.
Yeah.
We have too many people. But the point is that we do have a peak coming, and then we're going to have a slow decline in population. So we're going through what I call a bottleneck. We have to thread the bottleneck. We have to take care of people whose numbers are increasing from a little over 7 billion, 50% to, say, 11 billion. We can do that. Another unintended consequence is the fact that the economy is rapidly evolving to achieve that. We're requiring less and less energy, less and less material for making better and better products that require less and less repair and space And the whole consequence of this is that what we call the ecological footprint is shrinking. Ecological footprint is the amount of space each human being on average requires for all of our needs. And that's been expanding rapidly, of course, but now, thanks to these trends that come from high tech.
Right. Miniaturization will make our footprint
Absolutely,
smaller.
it's happening in that way.
Right.
So you're looking at one of the rare ecologists and environmentalists who is cheering on high tech and
Sure.
big business.
Sure. You simultaneously want to set aside half the Earth and generate as much high tech as possible to reduce the footprint generally.
Exactly, that's what we call synergistic. That's a Harvard term.
But
for
you have
cooperating.
I'm sorry.
What?
You have adversaries in this.
Yeah.
I mean, I have before Half Earth. I don't think that I knew the term Anthropocene, but I do now. Would you define what this era that we are in? People think that we. What do people think? What does that mean?
Well, let's use that word Anthropocene. You know, up until now, we've lived in what is called the Holocene epoch, the geologist term for what the period of warming, amelioration of climate on Earth following the beginning of the retreat of the last continental glacier. Okay, that's when humanity flourished and spread around the world. That was the Holocene. But now we have changed the world so much. The atmosphere, we've created layers of refuse in large parts and wiped out large parts of the forest and other natural environments, and we've extinguished a number of species. So that we've entered a change that's almost as big as any that had recovered a change during the last 65 million years. And some arguing that we really should stop calling it now the Holocene, but carve off the last 250 years, say back to the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, as that epoch in which humanity changed things drastically. And that term would be the Anthropocene. But that's separate from the argument made from it. The people who have thrown up their hands and said, well, it's too late to save the rest of life. We are changing the world so badly already, and we're losing these species. We're going to lose most of them. So relax, folks. Let's go ahead and just humanize the whole world and be done with it.
Yeah.
And just make things as good as we can make it. And then, anyway, we'll use high tech to bring back some of these species, to clone them and so on.
The de-extinction people.
Yes.
There are two things that you don't think are going to work. One is we're not going to go live on a different planet.
No.
The other is we're not going to bring back mammoths and dinosaurs.
No, I agree with you. I'm going to be very blunt when I say it's hard to distinguish which is the more stupid than thinking we're going to find another planet to live on. In other words, we use up this planet, we find another planet to use up.
Right.
But this denial, I have found, also it tends to glorify invasive species, like fire ants.
Sure.
Overlooking the fact that the economic damage to the United States alone from invasive species like fire ants and zebra mussels and so on amounts to well over $100 billion a year. So if you want to throw the gates open for invasive species and let them form what they call the new ecosystems, you're going to do it at an impossible price. Why not save what we have? It's the glory of the planet.
And the way is in the big chunks.
Yeah, that's
Rainforest, coral reefs, Arctic.
That's the only way it can be done.
Right. One of the arguments that's made by people who don't think that the extermination of species and so on can be stopped is that nature is red in tooth and claw. But I love the phrase. I don't know that you coined this, but I know that you use it, and that is dynamic equilibrium. And I read the chapter on the termites and the ants.
Yeah.
And they kill each other all day long, every day. Apparently, ants eat only termites.
There are some
only
eat termites.
The mellibelly ants, or
the matabelli ants are warrior ants that smash into these huge termite mounds and fight the soldiers, the termite soldiers that pour out.
Okay.
And the Matabellis defeat them all the time. They kill them. They gather them up in large bunches, the dead soldiers, and that's what they live on,
Right.
dead soldiers.
So if the natural state of things
Yeah.
is a natural state of attack and
Dynamic
kill,
equilibrium of
why
species.
should we be different? And that's where the dynamic equilibrium comes in.
Yes, that's right.
We're gonna mess it up.
Well, we have, and I just mentioned how badly we've taken it off equilibrium. We're killing species 1,000 times higher than they were being extinguished before we came along. That can't last.
Right. So they are killing each other all day long, but finally no ill effects. But we
yeah.
shouldn't do that because we can destroy the planet.
Yes.
I think in every book at some point you demonstrate optimism.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll get ahead of myself, but you know as much about ecology and whole swaths of biology as anybody. But one of the points that you make vigorously is the huge expanses of ignorance. Now, what percentage of species do we know about and not even know about at all?
It's quite astonishing.
I never
The
heard.
facts are quite astonishing. You know, it's true that we probably know almost all of the bird species because that's what people look for and that's what they care about.
Right.
10,000 species roughly. And we know most of the mammals, 5,000 roughly. But outside of these groups, and particularly when we get down to what I call the little things that run the world, you know, like the cockroaches and the earthworms and the ants and all the sea creatures, we find that we have only discovered about 20%. The number of known species of organisms of all kinds at the present time that has been discovered, given a scientific name, and we're beginning to learn something about them, is just about exactly 2 million. But the actual number has been estimated as roughly 10 million. That means that about 8 million species are out there making up our ecosystem about which science knows nothing. They haven't even been discovered. It's an amazing domain of ignorance.
So we're destroying a world that we haven't even yet learned about.
Of the species we know we're destroying those 1,000
Yes,
times
right.
faster. Of the rest of them, we assume that what haven't even been discovered, the same thing is happening to those. We're destroying each year, probably it's into the thousands of species, without ever, they were gone before we ever knew they existed. And so we need to get back to the business of mapping, discovering and mapping the diversity of the world.
Yeah, you make a nice plea for naturalists, as opposed to, in a sense, opposed to microbiologists.
Yeah.
And taxonomy. I mean, I love the idea of taxonomy. Go out
Yes, we need to revive that big time. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be the next big thing in biology. One of the next big things is the revival of the exploration of biodiversity and taxonomy, the classification, natural history, scientific natural history.
So what we need are young men and boys with a butterfly net and a magnifying glass wandering around in the grasslands and swamps of South Alabama finding species that no one has yet found. And they will find them.
Yeah.
Species.
They will. You just described me, of course. And I would generalize it by saying boys and girls
Sure.
with a butterfly net and with a botanical kit,
Yeah.
making discoveries on their own, as I did. I was actually making scientific discoveries. My first paper I published was when I was 19. It was a discovery of an almost unknown complete order of insects. I mean, you know, equivalent to cockroaches and butterflies and so on, the Zoropterans. And I rediscovered them in the state of Alabama, just poking around and digging through rotting logs and looking. And the opportunities are enormous for young people.
You, in book after book, you have described varieties of catastrophe. And yet in book after book, you will not give up on optimism. There is an optimistic, it's not always a long passage, but in every book there is Here's where the hope is.
Yeah.
You are optimistic. You are hopeful.
Yes, because there's no viable alternative. Be optimistic or be permanently unhappy, of course. I mean, humanity is just such an extraordinary species. We are the soul and the mind of the planet now, and we've got to act like it. And we have the ingenuity, we have the intelligence so far above that of any animal. We just evolved, good old Homo habilis, eating meat evolved,
Right.
To the point where we can do it if we want. We can save the rest of life.
Well, if your efforts will avail, we're in good shape. Thank you very much. This has really been a great pleasure.
I'm very grateful for being here.